Welcome back. Good afternoon. How are we all doing? How's your morning? You can't hear me? How about now? There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. How's your morning? Good? Everyone meet anybody? Anyone new? Did you meet anybody new? Have any conversations with anybody new? Wow, people are so sleepy. So we're back to the circle. You'll have heard a few times some drums on our audio. You may have realized the drums are a cue to get back to your seats because we're going to come back to the circle together. So when you hear the drums, come on down. I'm not up here for very long today, but I do want to say a few things. I heard some stuff this morning that really stuck with me. I heard a lot of stuff about storytelling, and I heard in one session, what you pay attention to, it grows. And that was really interesting to me this morning, thinking about a space like this, and taking the time to be together in a circle and how valuable that is to me. And I feel like I'm just grateful to all of us today here for paying attention, because what we're building here together is important. So thank you for that. So the first 360 is coming up, but before we get on with that, none of this is possible without the support of some sponsors, some partners, some friends. And so we're very lucky to have with us today our friends, presenting partner from Air Canada. I don't know if you've seen the squishy, comfy Air Canada lounge up in the Education Commons. If you haven't sat in it yet, you should sit in it. It's really good. It's probably the most comfortable place here. So thanks, Air Canada, for that. And to say a few words on behalf of our friends at Air Canada, here is the Director of Business Development, John Tory.
Thank you very much. Bonjour, jamba, bonjour, and hello. Air Canada is very happy to be here at 6 Degrees Toronto for 2019, and I hope that I did respect to saying hello in languages that come from 4 places where our speakers coming up have important roots. And that's just one of 4 of 220 places that we go to every day out of an extended network of 1,200 plus places. And it's a real honor when you think about things in the context of diversity and how we see the world and in bias and in challenge and what we're going to hear about today in the media, to have a chance to have a network that touches all these places and allows us to bring the world to Canada and to bring Canada to the world. Diversity is one of those things that isn't easy, and we have to keep fighting for it, and we have to stand up, us as a corporation, as partners to organizations like 6 Degrees Toronto, and everybody who puts their time and their names and their reputations forward to stand up for diversity and make sure that it's respected and increased. At Air Canada, it's in our DNA. Our over 30,000 team members, we work hard every day to make sure that our employees and our customers and our extended family have every opportunity available to them, and nothing is decided on the basis of age, of race, of religion, of culture, of language spoken, of sexual orientation, gender identity, or any of the above. Just today, we were awarded another distinction, which we worked very hard to get, and we thank you as our traveling public for choosing us to being the most friendly airline for families to travel on. And as I was preparing my comments for today, I thought about what it means to be in a family and what it means to sit at that table, that dinner table, or that living room table, or wherever people gather as families, whether it's people you're related to by birth or people through your community, and all the biases that are in that room with you. And I hope that today, as people, us as a corporation that faces the world and helps you to face the world, we also have a chance to explore the origins of our bias and learn how to do a better job of picking apart what's in the media, what we're seeing, and what really is important to focus on, and where our values come from in terms of making sure our diversity is respected, and we are creating new opportunities for those who are just entering our workforce or who are trying to make Canada a better place. At Air Canada, we have a couple of sayings. One of them is that we fly the flag. And flying the flag, of course, it's painted on the tail of our aircraft. A lot of our team members, we wear it proudly here on our clothing. It means that we're taking that maple leaf and we're carrying you with that maple leaf abroad. But oftentimes for people coming to Canada, we're the first thing that they see, or our team members are the first thing that they see. And it's because of forums like 6 Degrees Toronto that our Canada's leadership in the world, and through that, and we're proud of this, Air Canada's leadership in the world, means something. And the other saying that we have is that we like to win as one, which means that if we achieve a win as it's defined in a business context or operating a flight on time or anything like that, but we didn't do it as one, if we marginalized someone, if we left someone behind, that win is less valuable. So to us, we want to win as one. It means being better corporate citizens. It means being better guardians of the things that are important to us as Canadians, and it means that we are doing what we say we do when we want to represent what we feel are Canadian values, and everybody gets to win as one as we fly the flag. Thank you so very much for listening to me, and thank you for allowing Air Canada to be part of 6 Degrees Toronto. Enjoy.
Thanks to John, and thanks again to Air Canada. So with that, we'll head into the 360 this afternoon. A reminder, this circle is important, but this circle is also important, so please do take part, pipe up, be part of the conversation. Thanks very much.
Need to be signed in. Hi, everybody. I'm Rachel Giese. I'm moderating the first 360 How to Make Sense. I'm just getting myself logged in to the MacBook so I can keep track of what's going on. As David mentioned, I'm assuming you've all been filled in on the drill of these sessions. There's going to be a conversation happening within this circle, but there's going to be lots of opportunities for all of you to participate as well. We've got a couple of volunteers holding those yellow cubes. So at any point, if you want to wave your hand, they will throw it at you. They're soft, they don't hurt. And you'll have an opportunity. This is not some sort of like Canadian aggression coming out in a passive kind of way. They will allow you to talk into those cubes. And the tone that I like to set at this is respectful but not stuffy. It's great to disagree. I was talking to one of the presenters last night, Jess. I don't know if Jess is here, but she talked a lot about the importance of discomfort when it comes to learning. So I would encourage all of you to get uncomfortable with discomfort, to listen to things that are challenging, to not feel shy when it comes to speaking up, because if you're here, then folks here want to hear from you. This first session, How to Make Sense, has a focus on information and data and communication, and how we make sense of the world given what can feel like an overwhelming sea of news and information that is coming at us all the time. And to help us make sense, I have a fantastic panel of experts and thinkers. So to my left is Aude Favre. She is a journalist and YouTuber. Next to Aude is Ryan McMahon, a comedian, writer, and media maker. Across from me is Nanjala Nyabola. She is a writer, independent researcher, and political analyst. And on my right is Cory Doctorow, a writer and activist. So all of you, I want to start with technology, as I think a lot of these conversations need to start right now. 15 years ago, Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, Twitter, and smartphones didn't exist. Now these devices and platforms have profoundly transformed the lives of billions of people in terms of how we communicate and we connect. They've also upended traditional media, everything from places we get our news to our sources of entertainment. So I want to do a go-around with all of you and talk first about the positive. What do you see the main good coming out of this tech revolution. Ryan, I'll start with you.
One of my favorite indigenous philosophers and writers was Basil Johnston. And Basil Johnston is famous for saying, traditionally we were a contemporary peoples. And Basil is pointing to the notion that indigenous people always, no matter what century we're talking about, always picked up the technology of the day and found a way to use it for good. And why I like that so much is that that's what we have seen through time in indigenous communities, and it's no different when it comes to the internet. I think much of the success, if we could call it that, of Idle No More, Standing Rock, and these other acts of resistance and love come from the use of the internet. And so the strength of the internet and the way it is harnessed by indigenous communities here on Turtle Island, I think is proof positive that these tools, when used for good, can be tools for good. They have their limitations, obviously, which we'll talk about later today, but that would be my initial thoughts on that.
Thanks. Nanjala, do you want to leap in?
Yeah, absolutely. I do a lot of, the core of my research is based in my country, Kenya, but I've sort of done a lot of investigation in other countries around the world. And one thing that always strikes me about what the internet enables is new ways of being and belonging, new ways of thinking about community, new ways of thinking about who you are. In Kenya, we have a situation where our identity has been defined by the state for so many years, and we've been told the correct way to be Kenyan is to do X, Y, Z. And some of that is really negative. Some of that excludes women, it excludes LGBTI communities, it excludes ethnic minorities. And people are convening on the internet and saying, actually, no, I am part of this community, I am part of this society, and I'm going to define my belonging on my own terms. We have communities that are gaining visibility and immersing themselves in the public discourse in a way that they were not able to do, even as you said, 15, 20 years ago. When the government bans a film, for example, if the government had banned a film 20 years ago because it had a strong LGBTQI theme, probably would have just passed in the night. In 2018, when the government bans a film for that reason, not only do people convene online, thousands of people to stimulate that conversation, thousands of Kenyans, but managed to get it within the 1 week that the ban is lifted to be the second most successful film in the country's history. That would not have happened if we hadn't had access to these platforms and this ability to tell different stories about who we are.
Thanks. Aude?
Yeah, I would say, well, for me, it's good because we have more and more, for journalists, I think it's easier to work now than it used to be because the information is so all over, so I only see, at first, I only saw the good way of that, the good, the advantage, let's say, I'm sorry for my English, I try to speak, okay, I try to speak good, for me, the profusion of, the fact that there is a lot of information is very good. Actually, if you just want to, you just have to know how to look, how to find it. But it's a dream if we think about it, because it's you can find much more things, much more testimonies, or people having problems, much easier than it used to be, like in the 90s or. So I think this is good, really, in that way.
Yeah, and we'll get back to you on the negative in just a second. Cory, over to you.
So the thing that I like most about the internet is also the thing that scares me the most, and that it's so good at finding hard-to-find traits that are distributed around the world in a kind of thin layer, and to find people who have those traits and make common cause with them. So, if we think about our theory of change and how we got to here, how Canada went from a nation where in living memory it was illegal to be gay, it was illegal to smoke marijuana. In the US, it was illegal to be the product of an interracial marriage, a so-called interracial marriage. And in the space of a generation, people found the ability to make common cause with other people, not by standing on the street corner and declaring yourself to be outside the social consensus, but by whispering in the ears of the people you trusted and building up these communities. And today, the internet makes that simpler than ever. You can find people who have the same heterodox ideas as you, whether that's ideas about your gender expression, or ideas about whether it should be legal to smoke marijuana, or ideas about whether inequality is bad, and you can reach out to them. And I think that we mistake the internet as being an incredibly persuasive system, right? We look at big tech's own advertising materials in which they say, buy the right ads and we will convince anyone to do anything. And we assume that they must be telling the truth. It's a bit weird and credulous that we take these companies whose every utterance on every other subject is clearly a lie, and we say the only time they're telling the truth is when they're boasting about the efficacy of their products. But really, the thing that's persuasive is being a member of a community, right? And we pejoratively sometimes call that a filter bubble. But if you are the only Hasidic kid you know who is also queer, and then you can find people around the world who are queer and Hasidic as well, then you can find a way to build a life where you can be more like you are, where you can realize your true self. The regrettable side, and I know we're going to talk about the negative side later.
We'll start with
Sure. Because if you want to find a bunch of Civil War cosplayers to march through the streets of Charlottesville with tiki torches chanting, "Jews will not replace us," this is not a widespread belief. It is a thinly distributed belief all around the world, thankfully. But you can find all those people, and you can get them to turn up in full, neo-fascist regalia. And the problem is, I don't know how we get one without the other. Right? Any trait that is hard to find in the world is a thing that the internet is good at locating, including things like people who want to buy refrigerators, which is why it's so commercially successful. The median person buys one or fewer refrigerators in their life, so the internet makes it much easier to reach those people. And I don't know how we make it possible to find one kind of person who wants to be found.
Yeah.
We can talk about people who don't want to be found later, and not another.
Yeah. Ryan, I know one of the things that you have thought a lot about is the issue of access. So if we want to get into the downside or the drawbacks, I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about the question of how shared is access to these new technologies and platforms.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the great privileges I have as a comedian is to travel across this country and see all the far reaches of it. And 1 in 6 Indigenous communities right now in Canada don't have acceptable internet as defined by a number of academic studies. And so 1 in 6 communities don't have access the way you and I do inside of an urban space. And so, the question of access, I think, is really important. And it becomes a question of how we use. I mean, Facebook in the Indigenous community, Facebook is used to find your lost dog on the reserve. It's used to fundraise and sell Indian tacos to send your kid to a hockey tournament. It's used to break up with your girlfriend. It can be used for all sorts of really, really important reasons to use Facebook. But as we know, there are problems with the platform and accessing real helpful information, and the type of information that we find in our newsfeed is always in question. And so I think that the accessibility of the internet, just fundamentally in Canada for Indigenous communities, is a real question and a real conversation to be had. And when we talk about who has the internet and who doesn't, globally, you can see it. Play out in Indigenous communities globally the same way. So we have a lot of work to do in this country before we can really talk about the accessibility question as it relates to Indigenous communities. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nanjala, I know some of your work deals with the issue of data and the gathering of data, and I wonder if you could talk a bit about what your concerns are about the amount of access to data about us that is now available in the world.
I think one of the most insidious things that's happened over the last, I would say, 5 years is this flattening out of what it means to be a human being. And we are no longer talking about people in a holistic manner. We're talking about ourselves and each other as data points. And so, for example, yesterday, the Indian ruling party, the BJP, tweets out that, from their official handle, that India is the cheapest source of data in the world. They're not talking about mobile data, whatever. They're actually talking about Indian people. They're talking about the citizen information that's been provided for the government being turned into an opportunity for people to build platforms off of that, et cetera, et cetera. But what they're not talking about is the fact that 100,000 people, at least 100,000 people have committed suicide because of being excluded by this new data collection exercise that the state is doing. So they're not able to access farm implements, they're not able to access because they've been locked out, either because they don't have fingerprints, when you're a farmer and you're working the land, for some technical reason, they're not able to access the right benefits and they end up getting really frustrated and they kill themselves. We're not talking about the 1 million Muslims who have just lost their citizenship arbitrarily because of this new way of classifying who belongs, who doesn't belong, and using that information, operationalizing that information. For me, I think that, number one, it is terrifying to flatten the idea of a human being in such a way that their only value to the world is in the information they generate, because we all generate data and the capacity to monetize that. And the other thing that's scary is how it makes firm what is actually very nebulous. The things about our identity and how we see ourselves, they're things that we decide one day and we change the other day. I could have been born in a super religiously conservative family and then I become 20, 21 years old and I decide, actually, that's not the life I want for myself. And yet these data points are trying to make firm what is supposed to be fluid because we all have to adapt to a rapidly changing world. These are two of the things that, when I think about how we have conceptualized the role of data in governance, in public policy, in decision making, I think we've opened a Pandora's box that we're not really ready to deal with the consequences of.
Yeah. I want to get to you in a minute, Aude, to talk about disinformation and deep fakes. But before I do that, I wanted to open up to the audience on the question of data. I'm wondering if anybody had questions or experience around data collection, around, I think we have a hand up here.
I got.
Oh, sure. Yes, so these folks, if you want to reach out to speak, they have... who this is and who that is. You want to introduce yourself, folks?
You've already met me. I'm Yasser Naqvi, the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute for Canadian Citizenship.
And I introduce myself when I give my microphone away. And I'm Martin Cates, and I'm on the board of directors of the Institute for Canadian Citizenship. Cool. So when I give you a microphone, stand up if you can, and ask your question.
Yes, so we're talking...
Hold it a bit closer. Got it.
Yes. So we're talking about the data collection and so, and I remember a few years back a case of Cambridge Analytica and how they were interfering in elections and so, and how they collected all this data, very personal data, and they were able to intervene in some way. And so I guess there's the aspect of all these good things with data collection, but there's also some bad things as well. And I guess how do we balance the two, and what's the trade-off involved?
Yeah. Cory, I think you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I have feelings about this. So, I mean, Cambridge Analytica made a lot of claims about how well their technology worked, and in some ways those claims are very comforting, right? It is very comforting to believe that Cambridge Analytica used a bunch of non-replicable, hotly disputed psychological concepts like the big five personality types and so on, which frankly are not generally judged to be solid science in psychology, and that they used it to make people into racists or Brexiteers. Because the alternative is that what they did was found a bunch of racists that we hadn't suspected were kind of lurking out there in the woods. And I am inclined to think that Cambridge Analytica, based on everything they did subsequent to their exposure, is basically run by a bunch of grifty idiots. And so the idea that they're really bad at covering their tracks and spin and everything else, but the one thing they're super excellent at is developing mind control rays, is, I think, a not entirely plausible idea. So this raises a much more important question. If what they built was a people-finding machine, which is what I think they did, why are there so many people to be found who are willing to believe in outlandish ideas, whether that's eugenics or flat Earth or climate denial and so on? And I hope we'll get into this later, but kind of my very top-line answer to that is, in an increasingly monopolized and an unequal world, we are no longer able to trust the institutions by which we determine the truth. Right? The standards body that tells you the reinforced steel joist up here is going to keep the ceiling from falling on our head, and the body that tells you that the dinner that you ate last night isn't going to kill you before breakfast, and the body that certifies the plane and makes sure that the 737 won't fall out of the sky, and the body that tells you that we should leave the filthiest oil in the world, the Alberta tar sands, in the dirt. And when we can no longer trust our institutions, we either have to try to adjudicate each of those claims ourselves, which means acquiring the media literacy to judge different journals and decide which ones are reputable, and the statistical literacy to evaluate studies and their methodologies, and the domain expertise to understand the difference between vaccine denial and the people who said, no, opioids really aren't safe, stop taking them now, which were nearly identical claims being raised at nearly identical times. One was true and one was false. And in the absence of that, we lose the rule of law, and we retreat to the rule of man. We find someone who sounds like that they know what they're talking about. Donald Trump says the game is rigged. We know the game is rigged. If he's right about that, maybe he's right about everything. And that until we resolve that Cambridge Analytica will always find people to believe outlandish things.
And I want Nanjala to jump in, and then there's a question behind me.
I wanted to come back on that because one of the things, Cambridge Analytica was active in Kenya from 2012. They worked on our 2013 election, they worked on a 2017 election. It's one of the things that I write about in my book, because this is a core thread that runs through a lot of my writing. You cannot understand how technology affects society if you don't understand the society in question. The thing that you're talking about, truth, and how technology has shifted our perceptions of truth, I think is the biggest, it's going to be the biggest political question that we have to deal with over the next 10 years. However, every society has a different relationship with truth. When the White House, before 2016, puts out a press release that has the White House logo on it, people in the United States, all over the world, are inclined to believe that that is true. Now that's shifted. In contrast, in Kenya, I grew up in Kenya in a society that is rife with propaganda and the biggest disseminator of fake news in Kenya is the government of Kenya. And so when a press release comes out with the government of Kenya logo on it, I'm inclined to disbelieve it. I'm inclined to say, well, what else is out there? And so what technology has done to our discourses about truth in Kenya is it's created space for challenging official narratives and for bringing truth into the public sphere in a way that was not possible before this. Now, what Cambridge Analytica brings into this conversation, in Kenya, the efficacy of Cambridge Analytica had nothing to do with the internet. It had everything to do with the control of the traditional media. And it had everything to do with putting those two things together. And this is what we have to pay attention to. This is a reality that we dealt with in Kenya in 2013, in Nigeria in 2015. The fault lines along which our politics is split are incredibly dangerous. We have actually attempted to kill each other over these issues. When you add someone like this who is able to an institution like Cambridge Analytica, which is able to dwell in this murky area of what Colbert calls truthiness, and weaponize it, and then you add the layer of an authoritarian state that has control over the media that is doing that, you get a completely different outcome. You get Myanmar, you get genocide, and this is why we have to pay. So I'm not dismissing the fact that there is a lot of questions about the credibility, but every society is going to respond to the stimulus differently, and that's why we have to pay attention to it.
Thanks. Before I get to you, Aude, I just want to get to the right behind me. Hi. Hold it close to your mouth, thanks.
Like this?
Perfect.
Cool.
It's weird.
So my question is really around, one, when you look at, who's going to have which areas of the world have the most amount of internet growth in the next 5 years, you're really looking at countries that were traditionally considered to be developed countries. So India, Africa, Southeast Asia, parts of South America. And historically, when you look at where a lot of the more advanced technology was, it was in more Western countries, Europe, North America, et cetera. And so when you look at, I guess, a case like Cambridge Analytica, the question that comes to mind is like, okay, cool, Cambridge Analytica is one of many different political lobbying groups that are using this data to be able to meddle with external elections for their own benefit. And so I guess my question would be, do you see a change in where a lot of the more advanced political lobbying groups are from? Or are we about to enter another era of what would effectively be like digital colonialism, where foreign affairs can influence our own foreign politics to benefit their own means?
Anyone want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, have you read my book? Because I do spend a lot of time talking about this digital colonialism precisely because it replicates the contours of what went before. The idea that it is a British company or an American company, in the case of Kenya, that will come and interfere with an election for profit, that they don't have to deal with the consequences of what happened, that they will be in some ways insulated from the consequences because of their nationality, because they get to leave. They get to go back home, and we get to sit in the consequences of that. We're still sitting with the uncertainty that came from that in Kenya today. Ask Nigeria, the 2015, the fractures that were created around that election, how they've impacted public discourse since then. And yet these are, fresh grads who are, chasing this illusion, this, I guess, I don't know what to call it, adrenaline rush, by going around the world to feel powerful because they did XYZ in this remote country where they never have to go back again. That's the reality that we live in today. Is it new? I don't think so. Paul Manafort, the Somali election, his involvement, he's in jail right now, the involvement in the Somalia politics, in the Somalia conflict, in the Angola conflict. He was one of the people who spent many, many years sanitizing the image of Johannes Savimbi, who was a rebel leader known for his cruelty. Bought him a suit, put him in a cab, took him to Washington so that he could get people to sanitize the image of his brutality. It's not new. And the companies that are doing it, their origin is not new. What is new is that we have more people in the world today than we've ever had in history. And so when the fallout comes, it's not going to be this small, contained situation. It's going to spread throughout many, many different societies, and the number of people whose lives are going to be disrupted is going to be at a scale that I don't think we're actually ready for.
Thank you. Aude, can you, so much, your work centers around finding and addressing deep fakes and disinformation. I'm wondering if...
Fakes, not so much.
Okay.
It's fake news and...
Fake news,
conspiracy theories.
Conspiracy
which
theories.
is a lot already.
Yes, which is a lot. Thank you for fact-checking. So I wonder if you can talk about this particular moment and give us an overview of what is, what is happening right now when it comes to the ability of fake news, of propaganda to be spread, and how are platforms addressing it or not addressing it?
Well, I made a video on YouTube because I realized, for example, I go a lot to schools. Like when I say school, it's for let's say young people between 14 years old and 20. So I don't know how you call it here in Canada, but like high schools, I think. And for example, I noticed last year that I always ask them, what did you see recently? I don't go, and this is a problem for many journalists. They come and they just talk top to down. I go the other way, down to top. So I ask them first, what do you see? Is there some news which affected you recently? And they started talking a lot about satanism,
Satanism, yeah.
Okay. And I checked on YouTube and I saw so many videos about Satanism, like everyone is Satanist. And I made a video which showed how YouTube is actually promoting a lot Satanism through many videos. And actually, the answer is, why do they do that, And the answer is quite simple, is that basically, if I sum up, conspiracy theories are good for economy because the algorithm is actually pushing, those videos who can get you very long on the platform, So if you see like a video saying that this person is a Satanist or, like talking about this, you will want to see another more and watch another more, another more. And so somehow, I realized with that the YouTube was a big problem, and also because I guess it's the same here, but in France I also realized that many young people actually use YouTube as a moteur de recherche. How do you say that?
A search engine.
Yeah, search engine. Like they don't even go to Google first, or it's like they want to find out about anything, they just go on YouTube directly. And we have also a big crisis about journalism. In France, I guess maybe it's the same here. I went to Radio Canada this morning and talked to some people from the CBC, and I told them, I think I found a way, through my YouTube channel to address people. People are sick of institutions, like people coming top to down and just saying. And journalists, we are seen like this, people,
like closed off, like
the elite, you know. Okay, the people are sick of that.
Yeah,
and what I do on my YouTube channel is I just take a fake news, I investigate on it, and I show the whole process. Like you can see me phoning Ministère de l'Intérieur, you can see me, and then so you can see that it's a fake news, because you follow all my investigation, and then I phone the person who originated the serial faker. I call them
serial fakers.
Yeah. No, the person who had the idea of propagating the people. How do you say? La personne qui a mis la fake news.
Zero.
Okay, the person who invented the fake news.
Yes,
I phone them. And it's also very funny because they get caught, somehow they don't know how to respond. And this simple thing, I realized that just by doing that, just showing the process, I had many people on YouTube telling me, oh, at least you are a good journalist because you do the work very good. And it was crazy for me because I realized, no, it's easy what I'm doing and we all do it. But just because I show it, and because I talk from my kitchen, I don't talk like from a newsroom, like people can identify and they trust it, Yeah. So I think it all has to do also with, we have to change the way we are making journalism, and in institutions in general, we have to address people, like to think about it and do it like more, how do you say?
Egalitarian.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think, Marty, you have someone?
Thank you very much. My name is Knut. I represent the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, and we are a social.
Can you hold it up close to you?
We are a social democratic, progressive foundation, which 100 offices around the world, and I represent the foundation in North America, Canada, and the US. I just wanted to, because I very much like this conversation and find it very important, as an organization that tries to promote or support democracy, we are very concerned about two developments in our societies which have been tackled. I just want to share maybe two experiences from Europe, not from France, one from Germany, one from Poland, because I've worked also 6 years in Poland. But in Germany, basically, the political party, which is best at using social media is the alternative for Germany, which is a right-wing proto-fascist party. And they are the most successful in using social media to propagate their message of hate, their message of exclusion, and basically a very destructive way to organize society. One could go now in great details. And it's very difficult to combat that and to get through with our more positive and real narrative. They also create an alternative reality in social media, with videos, with fake news or disinformation, how I prefer the term disinformation, and it's very successful. And that the other, at the same time, you have a development in our society and in many societies that many people don't trust real journalism, quality journalism, and it is very difficult to overcome that. Even though I would say, like, our public-funded journalism is very, very good and very objective. But still, yes, it's part of the elite, and so people feel distance. And I mean, your ideas are, of course, small steps, but still, I think it's very difficult to overcome these parallel realities that start to exist in our societies. And it's a real threat for democracy. And I wish I had like a very good answer to tackle it. Yeah. But I mean, the overall question that I think is behind it is that we haven't found as societies really a way to tackle digital capitalism and everything around it, which is about information, about ownership of data, about regulation. But it's something that we really need to do, because otherwise I think the way that we live in, like it's free and also in just societies, is really difficult to maintain if we live in these parallel societies where like a part of society just disintegrates and lives basically in fear and hate. And to overcome this narrative of fear and hate, which is fueled by disinformation, is very, very difficult. And I really hope that, you know, this whole exercise helps us to find solutions for that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, we've got about 45 minutes left, so I'd like to turn this a bit to talking about some of the solutions, some of the positive potential, some of the effective techniques that are out there to make these technologies more democratic and more accessible, to spot and address disinformation, and to actually have these technologies and platforms live up, I think, to all the things that the four of you spoke about at the beginning of the potential. So you were doing a lot of nodding when Knut was speaking, so I'm wondering if you could jump in first, Nanjala, to talk a bit about some things you're seeing out there that have been effective ways to address some of these concerns.
It's weird. I got into an argument with the leader of the AfD in Dresden a couple of months ago, and he was trying to convince me of something that I knew to be objectively true, but it struck me that he was exactly what you've defined, a person who can take what is the realities. We're talking about censorship and the role of state media, actually, because their narrative is that the state media is spreading fake news and is actually part of the problem. And he was trying to convince me that we want a libertarian sort of media space where anybody can own a media station and do whatever they want and abolish state media. And the thing that it's exactly what you said, this ability to take something that sounds true and try and make it firm, but in a way that if you think about it, if you give yourself a second before you respond, you realize that's completely inaccurate. State media is probably the most important development that has happened over the last 100 years. There's a reason why we've invested in building these publicly funded platforms. But the issue that you've identified about this idea that privatization of information and this capital wild west approach to especially political information, I think is one of the big problems that we're going to have to deal with. And to tie into the question of solutions, what happens next? I think we have to rethink this digital sort of capitalist model that we've been embracing. Starting with a very simple proposition. We need more humanities. This STEM, disrupt approach to things is broken, and it's dangerous. Philosophy exists for a reason. Social sciences exist for a reason. There's no point in building this fancy, elaborate machines if we can't stop and think about, this science fiction. I forget the book, I think it was Asimov. Just because you can build it doesn't mean that you should. Philosophy, the humanities are there to tell you why you maybe should not build this machine. That's the very simple thing. I think tied to that then is to give people critical tools, and to go back to first principles. The reason why this conversation went the way that it did is because as this gentleman was talking, I had my first principles to go back to. I could call upon all of the techniques that I had learned as a social scientist, how to break down an argument, how to get through misdirection, how to bring something back, reasoning by analogy, all of these things. They seem really superfluous because we're being told that you have to be working 15 hours a day and moving and breaking things and disrupting things, but it's first principles, how to think. I don't think that there are enough of places in the world where we're teaching people how to think. I think we're spending so much time teaching people how to move and not think about consequences that we're losing these fundamental, simple things that have developed over time for a reason.
Cory, you want to jump in?
I want to reject the idea that there is a digital capitalism, right? The reason that the web now consists of 5 giant websites filled with screenshots from the other 4 is the same reason that we have 4 movie studios left and 5 major publishers and 4 record labels, and 3 energy companies, and 3 talent agencies. And if your glasses come from Armani, Brooks Brothers, Burberry, Chanel, Coach, DKNY, Dolce & Gabbana, Michael Kors, Oakley, Oliver Peoples, Purcell, Ralph Lauren, Ray-Ban, Tiffany, Valentino, Vogue, or Versace, or if you bought them at Pearl Vision, Sears Optical, Sunglass Hut, Target Optical, or at Lens Crafters, they all came from one company, right? We had 30 wrestling leagues, we've got 1 wrestling league, right? The reason that the bad ideas that companies converge on. Nobody came down off a mountain with 2 stone tablets saying, "Thou shalt stop rotating thine log files and instead mine them for actionable market intelligence." The reason that we have the bad ideas of individuals taking on outsized roles in our society is because 40 years ago we took the very deliberate decision to stop prohibiting companies from buying their competitors, to stop prohibiting companies from merging with major competitors, to allow companies to corner entire verticals, right? Think about the media landscape in Canada. You were talking about access. Well, you know, at one point, we had the idea that we would have a Crown Corporation provide access everywhere, and they would have an access mandate. Now we have firms who are given trillions of dollars in rights-of-way subsidy to dig up every road in every city in Canada, all the way from here to Vancouver, who say, but it's our private enterprise network, how dare you tell us where we need to put it, right? And the reason they can get away with it is there's only 3 of them, and they also own all the magazines and the TV channels and all the stuff that goes over those channels. And so the idea that this is an epiphenomenon of digital capitalism instead of just late-stage capitalism is, I think, a category error. Right? Let us focus not on what technology does, but who it does it for and who it does it to. That the role of STEM education is not to breed a nation of entrepreneurs who go out and move fast and break things. The role of STEM education is technological self-defense through technological self-determination. It's to learn to program so you are not programmed, to diffuse that praxis so that each person has a role, so that we are never doing anything about us without us in the room, without us having the right to change it, right? That's what a technologically positive vision is. It's not one in which we create rules that only the largest companies can follow, guaranteeing that only the largest companies can exist. It's that we dismantle the oligarchic power of the large companies so that we can each express ourselves technologically.
Thank you. I want to bring, well, Ryan, and then I'll bring you in. Ryan, I wonder if I could just bring you in on this, because I know you've talked a lot about getting past the gatekeepers and creating your own media network, and this question of self-determination. So I'm wondering if you can leap into the conversation on some of those thoughts.
Yeah, I created a network called Indian and Cowboy, which is an indigenous podcast network. We launched in 2014. As a response to being, you know, long held out of the broadcast space. And, you know, to this day in Canada, there's never been an Indigenous sitcom. There's never been a sitcom with an Indigenous person on it, other than Lauren Cardinal's Cop in Corner Gas, but I argue that was just a...
That's
anyway,
rousing endorsement.
Brent Butt might be in the room, so I don't know. I won't speak too badly about Corner Gas.
You're ignoring Tracy Deer's series?
Well, was it funny? I'm not ignoring Tracy Deer's series. It was more of a dramatic series. I don't think it was a sitcom. We can talk after about what a sitcom is, or isn't. But in response to having many projects go through development and being told time and time again that Joe from Saskatchewan would probably write angry letters into the state broadcaster if we talked too negatively about his country, the people didn't want to take a risk in putting us on TV. And so Indian Cowboy was born out of a sense of emergency and a sense of nothing else was possible unless we built it. And so, 5 years in, we're still fledgling, we're still failing. We still are struggling every day to find audiences that see the vision we see and hold the stories that we want to tell dearly. And to me, we become the stories we tell ourselves. Mm-hmm. And in talking about propaganda, Canada 150 was a hundreds of $1 million propaganda machine, where Indigenous people were going like, well, I don't fucking want to go to the birthday party. Like, I don't.
It ain't my party.
I'm not going to the birthday party. And in fact, how dare you for inviting me, to watch Sarah McLachlan sing sad songs in Ottawa. Like, let's stop inviting us to the birthday party and let's have a conversation about the country. And then the CBC and other broadcasters weren't ready and didn't anticipate Indigenous people reacting that way to Canada 150. And if you look at the way that money was spent by broadcasters during Canada 150, it was all late stage and it was all in small piecemeal because they thought everybody was just going to fly the flags and sing along to Sarah McLachlan rather than pitch a teepee out in front of the Langevin block and say, no, we're not going to celebrate. So, the response by Indigenous people time and time again to create their own thing with technology is because we've long been held outside of the gates. So, yeah. Indian Cowboy is a response because of that.
Thanks. Aude, before I get to you, Ai Weiwei is in the audience, and I'm wondering if I could get him to speak, if we could get a microphone to him.
Well, it's very nice to be here. I just listened to all those very interesting ideas and discussion. I feel very privileged to be here, just listening. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Aude, I know I wanted to pull you into this.
No, it was just to answer you. Just what I think. Of course, also in France, we lack media literacy. We really have to put this into schools. But what I try to do, for example, so I'm talking from a journalist's point of view, of course, there is some very easy thing. If you educate people of only trusting people who have evidence, it's very hard to have an actual evidence of something. For example, I'm saying that because some extremist people, I tackled some topics which were that they said, like, for example, about migrants and everything. And what I do is, okay, let's see the evidence of what this guy is saying. There is none. Like, if you really go, like, for example, there was, one guy who said that the European Union had been actually founded by an ex-Nazi, which is crazy when you think about it, but many people actually believe it, because it's very persuasive, and so you just go back, you on tire le fil, like there's a
pull the thread.
I don't know, which you just go to the source and the source and the source, and there is no evidence, and then you phone him, and then that's what I did. So I really don't find this. I contacted, I went to the archives to, where do you have this information from? And actually, he has it from nowhere, And then you show people. And this is just a simple thing, but only trust people with evidence, and there is not so many people who have evidence. Like real evidence is very, for journalists to find an actual evidence of some corruption thing is very rare, seldom. I don't know. Yeah. So this is one thing I would say, and also. And it also works, for example, for this narrative, like media. You have orders from the government. The other day, some guy told me that on Twitter. I said, okay, please, can you send me the evidence of that? You know, that Macron is giving me orders that I am obeying, you know. Please send it to me at this address, aude.whatthefake. Whatthefake is the name of my... And he didn't, of course, he didn't send anything. And I want maybe to make a show out of that, you know, like find people saying stupid things. Please, can you send me the evidence? And then we discuss it, you know. And okay, let's talk about the evidence you have. But it's just educating people about trusting real evidence. I think it's key. And also contradictory debate. This is one, it sounds like very simple, you know, for me, and I think for many people here, but only trust people who make contrary debates. Like in journalism, I cannot make an investigation without, for example, if someone tells me that you are so bad, you did this and that, I have to gather his information, what he says, and go up to you and say, okay, some guy tell me that, what do you think? Is it true or not? And I mean, give you the opportunity to defend yourself and to give your point of view. And this is never done in conspiracy theories, you know, it's only like one side. So this is like two things, but I mean, it all has to do with media literacy, and I think, yeah, we have to make journalism more popular, but this is also media responsibility. And I think it's urgent.
I want to get to the audience in a second, so I'd love to hear some thoughts from the audience. Oh, okay, great. Please go ahead.
I find this very interesting, but I have...
Can you hold it a bit closer?
I find this very interesting, but I have a 20-year-old son. And if you can't capture his attention in 10 seconds, you don't have his attention. And I think I think there's no analysis in 10 seconds, afforded in 10 seconds. And I think you know, there's a generation coming up that's their attention span. So when you talk about fake news or, you know, it's like this. They want the world like this. And education is, I think, I mean, first of all, I think poverty, and then if you can use education to bring them out of poverty, is the answer to this. Because through education, you create opportunities for analysis. And like you were saying, humanity and social sciences, I mean, you get that when you get an education.
Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, I want to talk about knowledge creation really briefly. I'm skeptical of claims that there are generational problems. You know, you can find quotes attributed to Socrates about how in his day the children would listen quietly, but now it's all gone to hell. So I am skeptical about that claim. I think that what you often see, especially in conspiratorial thinking, is not an absence of attention, but highly focused attention, right? It's not that people who believe in the flat earth lack evidence of it. The problem is that they have a bunch of evidence that is seemingly coherent because it's internally consistent, but is not well referenced. And debate doesn't always solve this, right? Putting the 1% of scientists, or less than 1% of scientists who think that anthropogenic climate change isn't real, on a stage next to the people who think it are, the overwhelming majority, leads to an impression of false balance, right? So historically, before we had science, we had something that was a lot like science, which is alchemy. An alchemist would observe two phenomena in the universe and hypothesize a causal relationship. This causes that. They would design an experiment. They would run the experiment. They would come to conclusions based on it. And the only difference was they wouldn't tell other people what they thought they knew because they were keeping it a secret. And this meant that they were never subjected to adversarial peer review, which is when people who hate you try to find ways to embarrass you. And if they told anyone, they would only tell people who would go easy on them. And this is how alchemists discovered for themselves in the hardest way possible for 500 years that you shouldn't drink mercury, right? And after 500 years, alchemists did convert the base metal of superstition into the precious metal of knowledge through publication. And today, we have a lot of access to publication, but some of our most rigorous publication is behind paywalls, right? And again, we have 3 major scholarly publishers. They are suing the activist who has taken that work and made it available, a Kazakhstani woman who has started a website called Sci-Hub, and they've sought and received blocking orders all over the world to block it. In the EU, blocking orders that were originally supposed to be only for music piracy have now become blocking orders against knowledge piracy. And the irony is, of course, most of that material has been publicly funded to begin with. So we have a problem of the difficulty of adjudicating claims anyway, but we compound that problem by hiding the information, the best information we have behind paywalls, and that means that not only are people in the poorest countries in the world frozen out of it, but also our debates become debates based on abstracts and on headlines and on vaguely remembered popular science stories as opposed to primary sources.
We have someone back here.
Oops. I don't think that I could be more articulate than you just were. I just got up because I don't want us to stay behind or hide behind these, they are like this, they are like that. C'est ça. That's what I want to do.
To be more direct. You mean to be more direct with our...
No, it saddened me to think that we don't believe that young people have an attention span of more than 10. It's not true. It's not true. And if we believe that, and if we look at them like that, then what? No, I think it's not a. It's dangerous to keep these sort of generalities and to actually look at our children that way. See, no. On peut pas faire ça.
Thank you.
Can I?
Yeah, Ryan, jump in. Oh, sure. I'm Ryan, and then I'll go to you, sir.
I too wanted to address the idea that young people, I mean, we can't blame millennials for everything, right? Like, because I just missed the cutoff, so no, I work with young people all across North America, and young people are engaged. Definitely, everyone has a chubby nephew who won't get off his iPad, and that's his whole life. But let's give our chubby nephew on the iPad something to look forward to. Let's give them something good. So let's not reject technology or the opportunity that we have to reach that young person on the iPad, but instead let's tell them stories too. And so for me, like when I work with young people, I see a motivated and engaged population of people that do want something better. And the trends show it. I mean, Game of Thrones fans, you sat there for years waiting for the last season so you could sit on your couch and be miserable for an hour and complain incessantly after on Twitter. Like you waited, you wanted that long-form story. Serialized storytelling has never been more popular. Long-form podcasting has never been more popular. Story is the revolution. And this is where people are looking. They're looking to find themselves in story, and more so than ever. So I wanted to respond to the notion that generally youth are not engaged. Hundreds of thousands of them are set to walk out of their classrooms. So, I mean, I think they're engaged. We have to, at some point, get out of the way and let them lead, support and mentor young people, and listen. I think we need to listen very closely.
Thank you. The gentleman with holding the cube.
Thank you. My name is Michael Gottheil. So I have a practical suggestion, and that is that all technology, smartphones, computers should be set up so that when you press send, it doesn't send for 24 hours. And at each 6-hour intervals, it comes back and says, "Are you sure you want to send?" And the same thing for delete, because I think part of the problem is that we send things too quickly without thinking, and we delete things that we receive too quickly without thinking, and we don't take the time. And so, Ellen's my wife, and yes, our son only looks at things quickly, but I don't think it means he's not engaged. I think it's because we live, what technology is doing is allowing us not to think about what we write. And I think if there was a delay, then a lot of people who send all sorts of crap wouldn't do it because they wouldn't get the exhilaration they're looking for because it wouldn't be immediate.
Yeah.
And I think people would have to think about what they receive. I'm just going to very quickly, I received an email last week. I'm the chief of the Human Rights Commission in Alberta, and I get all sorts of emails. But what this one was, it said, if I can remember it, please, the subject line was, "Please, I want to live." And the email said, my name is Mohammed S. I'm from Syria. We ask Canadian government for help. We die here in Turkey. And I can't take myself, I can't delete that email. It's in my email box. And I think we need to hold on to messages that are profound and meaningful and make us think, and try to find a way that what we're communicating through this, amazing mode of communication allows us to really communicate on a human level.
Thank you. Nanjala.
I wanted to come back on that sort of with a couple of issues. One is a recent study found that the generation that's actually most susceptible to fake news online is the baby boomer generation. And I'm not saying that to be contentious. Team millennial all the way.
I saw what you did.
But the underlying reason is trust. Is because people who are digital natives, who have grown up with Facebook, who have grown up with Twitter, who have grown up with Instagram, have a different relationship to it from people who have come to it already as adults. And one of the fundamental differences is, for example, with Facebook, with the younger generation, there is a recognition that this is a private corporation, that they have a fiduciary interest in putting certain information in my face and not others. Whereas if you've grown up trusting newspapers, if you've grown up trusting television, if you've grown up trusting the radio, you transfer that trust onto Facebook when you really shouldn't, because the interest that Facebook has in giving you information is different from the interest that the CBC, for example, has in giving you information. That was one thing. The other thing is, again, another study, for the first time last year, books outsold ebooks since the introduction of ebooks. A lot of these things are cyclical. Human nature is cyclical, it's iterative. We're having the same conversation. Every time the media does some dramatic shift, we have the same conversations. The Luddites with the, what was it called, the press. The first time we introduced the printed press. Yeah, it's going to make us all atheists, and it did, but that's another story. With the radio, same panic. With television, I did this longitudinal research, and the ways in which Americans reacted to television when it was introduced, the moral panic, it's going to make housewives lazy. And these were things that were on the front page of all of the major publications. We adjusted to it, but what I want to underscore in that conversation is that it was a conscious effort, that we didn't just let tech happen. We didn't just let the radio happen. We saw a couple of things that we were worried about, and we built standards into the way we do journalism, and we built standards into the way especially political communication, for example. You can't put an advert in most democracies, not all of them. You can't put a political advert in the newspaper without saying that it's a political advert, without saying that someone has sponsored this message. Until 2015, 2016, you could do that on Facebook. You could do that on Twitter. And so, yeah, we're going to sit in this weird interregnum where we are trying to define what standards and what the digital future is going to look like. But like you said right off the top, Rachel, we have to lean into that discomfort and think about, what do we want this to look like for the betterment of all of our futures? That's going to be an uncomfortable process, but I think that's where we need to be heading towards.
Thank you. We have someone back here, I believe.
One over here.
Okay, great. There, and then there.
Hi, my name's Akash Maharaj. I'm from the Mosaic Institute. Thank you very much for your panel. I'll never think of Cambridge Analytica without hearing the word grifter again. Each of you has talked about creating pathways so that the truth can circumvent roadblocks of lies. And you've talked about cultivating media literacy so that citizens can sift truth from lies. I wanted to ask a parallel question, and that is, what do we need to do to foster social norms where people prefer hard truths to easy lies? Because when you talked about, for example, the Brexit referendum, one of the things that I thought was most tragic about that was not that the campaign was awash with lies. Campaigns are always awash with lies. And for every person who wrote an op-ed or gave a speech that said Brexit is going to save the country billions of pounds, there were other people just as forcefully and far more credibly saying this is a lie. It's difficult to look at the result of that referendum and not conclude that millions of people heard the truth and heard lies and decided that they preferred the lies to the truth. So my question is, what do we as citizens, as organizations, as governments need to do to foster a culture where people decide that we are going to favor hard truths over easy lies?
Right.
Great question, thank you. Does anyone want to leap in? Do you want?
Oh, I gotta go.
Nice meeting you. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
McMahon, we were counting on you for this one. You are not leaving now. Do you want to step in?
Sorry, I didn't really understand the question, and I think it's good. So
correct me if I mischaracterize it. But the question is, in a world where how do we convince people to accept truths, reality that might be difficult and painful and uncomfortable over lies and disinformation that makes them feel good. It supports their existing belief system. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. How do we convince people?
Yeah. Oh, do you want to start first and then?
Honestly, for me, it's we have to make politics boring again. I think this idea, boring again, it has to go back to being uncomfortable truths, to being complicated things, to being this idea that political information needs to be packaged in a sexy way. The 9 o'clock news, that it needs, a special introductory font and music and all of that stuff. I think we have to go in the other direction. And I say this because a lot of the confusion exists where people get confused by the form of the information and not necessarily the substance of the information. So someone buys a green screen and a TV set and they say, I am news now. And they say the most insidious things, and people are so blinded by that form of things. We have a group that specializes in this in Kenya, that they've built an entire media space online, both print and video, and it's the worst and ugliest propaganda that you've ever seen in a country that has a long history of ethnic inflammatory rhetoric. And it gets by because they're sitting in front of a bookshelf. And so they're saying this is very smart analysis from smart people who look at all the books. Smart things are happening here. And I think to go back to a more austere sort of approach to these things. We have this misconception that political information especially has to be packaged in a sexy way for young people. And so it's always about growing audiences and getting more people to watch the news and getting more people to do X, Y, Z. And the people who have done the best job, in my view, of resisting this paradigm, look at I love NPR, I love public radio, I love public television because it's very austere and it makes me feel less that I'm being badgered into an opinion and more that this is actually what happened, it's not pretty, you don't like it, fine, take it or leave it. And to me, that kind of loops back to the previous question about digital capitalism. I think political information, I'm increasingly of the opinion that political information should be treated differently. I don't necessarily know how that will look like, but I see it in the way we've done it on traditional media, in print and in television and in radio, and I'm increasingly of the opinion that we need to start thinking in that direction when it comes to digital news. But I don't know what the form of that is going to be in the end result.
We're getting close to wrapping up. There's one more person in the audience over here, and then I want to do a last go-around with everyone here on the stage.
Hello. So my name is Sinead, and I just really wanted to jump in on the conversation because I'm a millennial. I'm 17. And so I wanted to bring it back to what Ryan said and about how technology is really helping like protests and creating social and political change. And I know Cory wrote about this in his books. I'm a huge fan of your books. So as a young person, like we use technology to create, to try to create change. And like this past April, there was the Students Say No walkout, and I was one of the organizers for that. And all of that was run, all of that was run through social media, solely social media. And we only used Instagram and some Google Docs. And it was a huge success. We had hundreds and thousands of students from all across Ontario participating. And then on Friday, there's the global climate strike. And I know I was watching Greta Thunberg's speech. I think she was at the UN, and it was a great speech. And this morning I saw a news that said that Trump had said that she was basically, she looked too happy and she was basically trying to discredit her, but it was kind of dumb. And I just think, what do we do when we're walking out? There's hundreds of people who are sharing these stories and they're protesting and they're saying this isn't right, but the adults, the elite people that are up there still aren't listening to us. Like, what do we do when nobody's really taking this seriously, when the people who are in power aren't actually listening to the hundreds of thousands of people who are speaking up?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. Do you want to, do one of you want to take this question? What do we do when the people in power aren't listening? Okay, you want to answer that one first? Okay. Okay, so why don't, Ryan, you respond to this one and this question here, and then I'll get Aude.
Yeah, I think that those of us that that have privilege and that share some sort of power imbalance or some sort of space where we're generally comfortable. I'm a very privileged person in many ways in my life. That comes with a responsibility. And I think that those of us with privilege and those of us that can do so need to identify the privilege, name the responsibility that we have back to our communities, and be brave and be bold. And you know, I'm a pretty harsh critic of this country, and this country historically has been an apathetic, lazy place to be. There are some people that had some big thoughts and big ideas that have created some good policy for some people, but we need to be motivated. We need to be intentional, and we need to be very purposeful about the way we want to change this country. I hoped that Canada 150 allowed us to take a moment of pause and to imagine something better for the next 150 years. We're still just a few years out from Canada 150, and I'm not sure where we're at yet. I think we could discuss that in a totally other panel. But we need to be brave, and we really need to ask ourselves and take to account the mistakes of our past in order to build a better future. There's a word in my language called biskabiying, which talks about looking back in order to look forward. And we need to be brave enough in Canada to be able to look back at where we were, to imagine or reimagine where we will go. And it's going to take a lot of bravery to create the change that I think we are all identifying now, inside of this country, but also, you know, outside of this country, globally. So,
thanks, Ryan. Aude, I want you to leap in.
It was just to answer. So, if I understand well, the question was. I'm sorry, but it inspired me a lot. So, it was how do we convince people to like, let's say, like complexity of life, of news. Okay. I think people hate, you know, I don't think I see that people hate being like deceived, you know, like, and I think from what I do, that if you unmask people who really tell lies, it helps them a bit. Okay, so it was very attractive, but the guy really said bullshit, you know, so maybe I'm going to trust now more people who are more like nuanced, you know, like news which are more
nuanced and complex.
Okay, complex. And also, I don't know, people sometimes tell me it's a crazy idea, but for example, presidential elections in France, it was crazy, filled with fake news. I think maybe here you also have some problems, from what I understood. Sorry about that. But how about changing the rules? Like, if you make too much disinformation, you're out. You cannot compete, you know? For me, it's a simple thing. I mean, like, the idea, okay? Then you have to put it into practice, and I guess it's more. But, I mean, at stake, there is running one country, so of course it has to be difficult, and you cannot lie. It's very shocking for me. I mean, you can like make some errors, but like real misinformation, like manipulating people, it should not be. You should not be able to do that. So I think also the media has a responsibility in that. And but I think for me, if one day I am president in France. No, but I'm just saying there has to be rules. And if you make too much disinformation, you're out of the competition. It sounds like very simple. You know, when we play any board, you know, there are some rules, and if you don't comply by the rules, then you're out. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like very easy to show, you know. I mean, in France, at least, I could show, like, it's easy to show if there is no evidence of what is said, and maybe it will also help politicians to just measure more what they say, you know, because everybody wants power, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know, it's just...
we have a couple more minutes left, and I just want to get Nanjala and Cory in with final comments. Maybe leave us with, we've sort of ended on this note of solutions or tactics. If there's one thing you want to leave us with in this conversation.
You want to go first?
No, but I will.
Go first if you like.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think that when, as activists, one of the things we need to understand is this idea of peak indifference. That when you start off as an activist trying to sound the alarm about a problem that's complicated, whose causes are nebulous, whose effects are nebulous, like climate change, that people will at first be hard to convince, and your job starts as convincing them that there is a problem at all. But if the problem is real, it really doesn't matter if you convince people, because there will be a policy debt that's built up, right? If you do nothing about rising inequality or rising seas, or if people who don't think cigarettes cause cancer to continue to smoke, eventually that debt comes due, right? Your house burns down, someone builds a guillotine on your front lawn, your doctor tells you have double lung cancer, right? And at that moment, the job of an activist switches very quickly from convincing people that there is a problem to convincing them that it's not too late to do something about it, right? So denial gives way to nihilism in a hot second, right? We go from being like, well, there's no rhino population problem to, well, there's only one rhino left, we might as well figure out what he tastes like, right? And so convincing people that it's not too late becomes this really important job right at the last moment. And we're on the tipping point of something very exciting and even a little scary. So we've talked a lot about the ecology movement. I marched in the first Earth Day parade here in Toronto and ended up in Nathan Phillips Square and wheat pasted for it. I know what it's like to try and organize a movement with wheat paste and photocopied posters as opposed to Facebook. It's hard. The thing that's interesting about the ecology movement is that before the ecology movement, there were people who cared about fresh water or whales or owls or the ozone layer, but they didn't think they had one thing, right? They didn't think they were all on the same side. The term ecology welded that together, and we are living the legacy of the term ecology, bringing solidarity across multiple struggles. We are now on a tipping point about inequality, monopoly, and oligarchy, where people who care about their eyeglass prices, and people who care about the fact that their national treasury has been looted, and people who care about the fact that all of the newspapers are owned by one rich family who decided Doug Ford would be the guy to run Ontario, that those people are all realizing that they're on the same side as the people who are worried about the plurality of the web. And that moment, right, that is the moment where we can suddenly weld together these disparate struggles into one. And what we see, as with the ecology movement, is that there's no such thing as defeat. There are only a string of steps forward and small steps back. That the umbrella revolution begets the Hong Kong uprising. That the fight for Idle No More begets a new, more radicalized Indigenous people who go to Standing Rock, right? What we would hope would be just a smooth curve to victory is always going to be the scalloped curve where we attain a little victory and we fall back and we attain the next victory, building on what we had before. And as more people are drawn into our movement, there is the potential for hope. Not optimism, not the fatalistic belief that things will just get better, but hope, which is the belief that if you do things, you can make them better, and we can do it together.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cory. Nanjala, I'll leave the last word with you today.
I'm going to sort of begin with the questions that, the issue that you raised. And I think it's really important to remember that the internet didn't create your protest. You created that protest. And we've done this very strange thing where we've taken human action out of many of and not just the movement that you were part of, but look at how we talk about the Egyptian Revolution and Tahrir Square and what happened in Sudan and what happened in the Arab Spring. The internet didn't do that. People did that. And one of the things that really shifted my thinking on this is when I started to think about history, not just as the last 20 years, but as the last 50 years, as the last 100 years. The most successful political movements in Africa in the last 100 years were our movements for independence. And there was zero internet. People wrote wherever they needed to write, they spoke whatever, there was whispers, there was a lot of organizing that did not happen anywhere formal. But it worked because of the people. And people will find a way, people who believe strongly in ideas and who believe strongly in things needing to get better will find a way to make it work. And so what I would say to you is, don't let the ability of the platform sort of obscure from your own organizational belief in what you guys want to do differently, what you guys want to see the world do differently. In Sudan, they protested every day for almost 8 months for a change in government after 30 years. And then one day the government switched off the internet. And without the internet, without mobile phones, they were able to mobilize 1.5 million people in Khartoum alone, using neighborhood committees, and people would get on buses, ride the bus in one direction, turn around, ride the bus in the other direction, telling people, we're meeting on this bridge tomorrow at 8 a.m. And they did it. This was 3 months ago. So the internet is a tool. But your politics, your ambition, your vision for the world should not be constrained by the tool itself. This is kind of hinted at as what I've just said. I do a lot of what I call theorizing from the periphery. And one of the things that I find in the conversation about tech is that we tend to look at the core, this is Immanuel Wallerstein, we tend to look at the powerful countries and extrapolate thinking about how the rest of the world is going to behave based on what's happening in wealthy countries. And I try to flip that narrative on its head and begin my theory in the countries that we're ignoring. And one thing that you find is things like this, is that people are hungry for change, and they'll use whatever mechanism possible to get that change to come. But at the same time, we have abandoned one key element in protecting our political spaces, and that is we need ideology. And ideology doesn't mean capitalism versus communism. I refuse to believe that in a world of 7-point-whatever billion people that we have peaked, that this is it for our social economic theories, that we said capitalism and Marx said communism and that's it, we're done. I refuse to believe that that is true. I think there is still a great deal of intelligent thought that can be put towards thinking about how we organize our societies and our economies for the betterment of all people. This is one of the main lessons that comes from thinking about technology from the periphery. People are doing things that the core doesn't necessarily see as interesting, important, or whatever, and using, for example, in Kenya, Twitter to build a parallel electoral tallying system because the official tallying system was compromised by the state. And that is how we got the opposition to know where to start looking for electoral fraud, because people went on Twitter and asked, can I have a copy of the form that was supposed to be posted on my constituency station? And it kind of ties into what you were saying, Aude. I think that, again, it depends on who you see as the arbiter of truth. Because the person who paid for Cambridge Analytica to be involved in Kenya was the person who was in power. And so when you think about if they will just take themselves out of the equation, you kind of hit a brick wall with that. Again, theorizing from the periphery. I'm going to stop and leave you with, for me, the three things that flow from this conversation about how we have shifted the place of truth in political discourse. How do we protect the sanctity of the arbiters? How do we protect the sanctity of the people who set the standards, the people who tell us this is a vaccine and it works X, Y, Z? Number two, how do we keep money in its rightful place? Because I think that's one thing that we haven't done a good enough job of. Money is not in its rightful place in the way we're theorizing the digital. And finally, how do we keep the human in the conversation? We are not data points. You are not a data point. You are a person. You are a member of a community. You are part of a history. You are part of a genealogy. You are part of a bigger story. You are not a data point. How do we keep that perspective in the conversation? I think those three are the big challenges that we're going to be thinking about over the next 10 years.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank all of these phenomenal panelists for their energy and their thoughts. I want to thank all of you for your kind attention, for your comments. And if you didn't get a chance to leap in, the good news is this is just the first 360. So there are going to be many more opportunities for conversation, many more opportunities to talk. Thank you so much. David Leonard is going to come forward, I think, just to close us up before the break.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks, Cory, Aude, Nanjala, Ryan. That was fantastic. Thanks, everyone in the audience. Thank you for organizing protests for all sorts of things. There will be some book signing in the Education Commons from some of the people on this stage right now. Cory, Nanjala, and Rachel will be up there. So if you haven't had a chance to say something to them in the circle, you can have a chance to say something to them right to their face upstairs. Maybe you can talk about new ideologies or how we can be more human, which is pretty fantastic. There's 5 exchanges coming up after a break. So there's 4 which are traditional, 2 in the seminars, 1 in the Education Common, 1 in Jackman Hall. And then there's 1 that's a sort of mobile exchange. So our friends here at the AGO have put together a curated art tour of some pieces in the collection that are sort of germane to our topic today. So that's a meeting point for that. It's in the Education Common if you want to go see some art. That's available to you. We're back here tomorrow in the same space with people like Pussy Riot's Nadia Tolokonnikova, Deutsche Welle's Jafar Abdul Karim, Kedi Nivyabandi, who I think is here somewhere, and lots of other great people. Tomorrow night, we have the Adrian Clarkson Prize for Global Citizenship, which will be given to General Romeo Dallaire, performance by Rufus Wainwright. Tickets available at 6degrees.inclusion.ca. And tonight is the LaFontaine Baldwin Lecture given by Adam Gopnik. So half an hour break, exchanges begin, and those are the last sessions of the day here today. Thanks so much.